How's it going, YouTube? Come on, today with another video, and today, guys, what the video is going to be where to hand trap. Thank you all so much for the unwavering support yesterday. Been a rough time, but thank you so much, and we're just going to get back to doing more of what we do best, and that's talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Here on the channel. So, definitely appreciate each and every one of you, and if you haven't already checked my sponsors over on Gem, Cloud, Arla, Imperium, Dragonshield, RW, MainPhaze, or Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so down below in the description. And then if you want some coaching or a METAFY for some one-on-one sessions, definitely go ahead and check it out. It's pretty helpful, and that's really what sparked me to make this video today, because I had a really nice session with somebody last week, and I feel like there's a couple things that I need to dive a little deeper on in these videos, so today it's going to be a little bit extended, and I hope that you enjoy that. If you want to be a part of my current goal, we're trying to hit 30,000 subscribers, so definitely go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and without further ado, let's hop right into where to hand trap. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is going to be Fiendith Yummy. So between this and as a Mina Yummy, which we'll talk about next, these decks have been really popular lately, and they're both very strong. But there's a couple different ways that you want to go about hand trapping them, and you'll see next to Imperm I left a card in a couple of these slides, and that just means that I would save Imperm for my turn so that you can go ahead and answer something like a Caesar if you have no other way, like you don't see a droplet in your hand or something, right, and you need an answer for it. This is the card that you want to wait for, because this deck right here is not really ending on a negate per se. They're going to end on Caesar, but usually not Desiree, so that's where you'd want to hold the Imperm for the Caesar. But otherwise, you know, you can hit like the Cupsy, which is really good, just like the Cupsy Yummy to cut off access to the surprise. That's why I have it under Ash Blossom. And I think that that's really important, because if you have not seen a cat yet and they like gravity controller their way into the Cupsy Yummy way without using a cat, then you can always go ahead and hit the Synchro. But you want to hit the Cupsy Yummy to cut them off of surprise, because that's the scariest part of the end board every time. So definitely make sure that if you see just like Cupsy Yummy hit the board, that you're just hitting that. And this more so applies to like Azamina, where in this matchup you'd want to just hit the Cupsy Yummy, because a lot of times you need the cats to actually combo in this versus Azamina. But for whatever reason, if your opponent is able to just like show you the Cupsy Yummy way without showing you a level 1 cat first, then you want to hit the Synchro. I know Ogre is not the most common right now, but I'm going to show you quite a few ways where it can be pretty effective. And just because something isn't common doesn't mean that it's not very good. And that's another card that plays around things like Cross Out, because no one's going to expect the Ogre, right? So really impactful still. And then Nibiru is going to be when your opponent presents Princess and Engraver, because that just means that they're going for Caesar, and you don't want that to be able to hit the board. DD Crow on Engraver is going to be really strong, so your opponent can't get through the other 6. You can also bell the Engraver, but a lot of times you want to just have like a combination of 2 cards to force your opponent to tag out their Synchro and then bell their Synchro so they don't get their monsters back to the board. And this is even better if you have Ash Bell, because if you Ash the Cupsy, they don't get the surprise, then they go to tag out their Synchro, you bell it, a lot of times you're probably winning that game because your opponent has no follow-up, at least in the turn that you were playing. They can't keep interacting by bringing back bodies, and it can get very awkward very fast. But as a Mina Yummy, again, things are going to change a little bit, because a lot of times your opponent's going to be using things like Demod and Magician Souls to be able to get to their Cupsy Yummy way without presenting a cat first. And if this is the case, you want to just Ash the Synchro. If you don't see a cat, you got to put them on. You better have a cat, right? So that's really important. But if your opponent leads a cat, I'm just going to Ash the Cupsy Yummy instead, because again, I want to deny access to the surprise. Bell wanted, because you don't want your opponent to be able to get to the entire line with like the Sylvia and the Dragoon. Just try to stop that altogether and put them on. You better open the Black Witch, right? By the way, you do want to Ogre the Black Witch as well, so that you can deny your opponent access to the D-Mod, so they can't get the access to the Magician Souls and combo that way into their Yummy cards. Otherwise, Valor Imperm onto D-Mod if you do see it, so your opponent can't get to the level 1, especially if you haven't seen a cat yet, right? So this is a large part of put them on, you better have a cat, right? So if you do see them lead like Cupsy Yummy, though, again, cut that off, don't let them get to surprise. I do have the DD Crow with a question mark, because it really depends on what variant they're playing. These builds are largely divided on if they're playing Gaze of Timaeus or not. And if you do see Gaze of Timaeus, then you can just wait for your own turn and then DD Crow the D-Mod out of your opponent's graveyard so they can't summon the Dragoon, because otherwise they're just trading the Sylvia, which just feels weird at that point, right? Because they're just trading like a negate for a negate, which is like not great. The other part of this too is that This build largely will have negations on the board, but if they're going for souls and they just have Sylvia, they do play Asmina Debtors, which when that card's engraved, the next turn they can actually revive the Sylvia. So make sure you have a game plan to be able to out to Sylvia twice, or at least banish it out of the grave, or like bell the effective Debtors to bring it back, so that they don't get that as a part of their follow-up. Because that can also be pretty detrimental, being able to recur a Omni Negate, right? So definitely a very common matchup right now, but there's a lot of ways that you can go ahead and counteract this. The next one here is going to be Draco Tail. So you want to DD Crow the target of Urgula, which is usually 5 meta. Sometimes it's Lucia, so they just want like a solid start to their turn, but it's usually 5 meta. You want to be able to bell the trap cards, usually Flame though, because spell cards are really important, especially when you're trying to crack a board. So being able to bell something like Flame, or like if you're playing double Cyclone, of course, you can always like double Cyclone your own spell and then target a different trap card, which this is a card that you should be running right now, because if you run into Draco Tail, double Cyclone is like the best card that you can open with a good power spell, right? So the other one here is going to be Ashing Rahu. Now, I know that this can be a little weird, but if you see your opponent trying to resolve Branded Fusion immediately, I'm just letting it resolve. They'll summon Sanctifier, they'll send the Draco Tail, they'll send Elbaz, and then the Draco Tail is going to set Rahu. And then now you're going to Ash the Rahu, and it becomes immediately more awkward, because they can have a Sanctifier, that's fine. That doesn't really do a whole lot. What's going to happen, though, is you're going to Ash the Rahu, and they can't send Urgula 5 mana, be able to get to Ketu and a trap card, and then be able to extend off of, like, a Lucius, right? And then keep going with their Draco Tail engine. This is the part that you want to shut off. You don't care about Branded Fusion for the most part. You just want to stop the Rahu after they resolve the Branded Fusion, because now they're in a really awkward spot. And it doesn't matter if this card says activate at that point, because you're ashing it, and it just stops the effect. So they can't activate a new one, right? So this is like the heavy hit of the deck. If you want to make sure that you win this game, this is a really good way to try to help you get there. The next one, Ogre on the Synchro. I have said this since the beginning of the Synchro being released. This is still the craziest hit in the deck. If they go effective Synchro and you Ogre it, it is a horrific spot for your opponent to be in. This is something that you really want to make sure that you're doing. Getting rid of this immediately is really strong. Now, you can always imperm the Arthalion when you're going second, which is fine. But if you want some more directed spots for your hand traps, Lucius is always good. Obviously, you run the risk of chain 5 mana. But like, I'm still just going to go ahead and imperm the Lucius if all I have is imperm. And then if your opponent opens Fallen of White Dragon, you can just go ahead and hit that immediately too. And it's just one of those things to really guarantee that your opponent is not going to go further than they need to in their combo, right? So these are all really solid spots, but these two right here are going to be the most important. But the next one here is going to be Fiendith Magnet Warrior. Now with DD Crow, you're going to go ahead and hit the target of Sigma Plus, which is usually going to be beta after they send both of these off the linear. And that's just going to deny your opponent the access to be able to add the green one to go into their fusion lines. You want to go ahead and Nibiru again when your opponent presents the Princess Engraver trying to go for Caesar. You can always go ahead and Valor the Plasma Magnum, or you can imperm the Caesar. It's really going to be up to whatever you find more detrimental to you. I think that it is nice to go ahead and imperm the Caesar on your own turn, but if you need Valor or Imperm to go ahead and stop the Plasma so that your opponent doesn't get the additional Magnet Search, is going to be really impactful as well. You really want to be careful in this matchup though, because if your opponent goes ahead and does something to summon like Magnet Bonding and you impulse it, and they have the Plasma Magnum on board, everything's Earth on board, you no longer can activate any monster effect, because technically all your monsters are now Earth, right? So really awkward, and something that you really have to look out for. You can ash the effect of Magnet Bonding to search so your opponent doesn't get to linear and start all their plays. This is really huge. Or just Magnet Bonding, when it goes to recycle everything, you can just bell it, right? Because at that point they don't get to their fusion, and it gets really awkward because your opponent can't extend further. Magnet Bonding is a very strong card, and you want to be able to stop this at all means necessary. Now, there isn't a whole lot to say about Malice, right? This is still just a matchup that we're very familiar with. The wizard target, you can Crow, you can bell the field spell, you can ash the MTP if you want to on your own turn when you're trying to play into their board, or if your opponent's leading off, you just ash the Chessie immediately, because this deck still has a really hard time getting started, so ashing Chessie can be very detrimental. Any link 2 that your opponent goes for, obviously besides like Wicked, you want to be able to Ogre so you keep your opponent off a link 2, and then Valor Imperm the first thing that you see, because it could be the Rabbit going for like TB11, or if they normal summon like the Dormouse, you want to just stop that early because at that point your opponent doesn't have the additional extender. Radiant Typhoon, you can go ahead and DD Crow the Phonix or the other Varun out of the graveyard so your opponent doesn't get back there like boss monster. But there's 3 main ways you want to hit this deck, and that's going to be Bell, Mourner, Ash onto Crocea, because this is the craziest starter that they get. You can Ogre Mandate, which is the craziest card in their deck for their end board because it gets you like a double negation for the most part. And then Valor Imperm onto Varun because you want to make sure that your opponent doesn't get to Mandate. The other one here is going to be VS Canine. You can just DD Crow the Lupus or the add back target for the Rock of the Vanquisher. If you see them like send Rosin to the grave and immediately go add back, right, you can just go ahead and DD Crow that because of the fact that you don't want your opponent to get to double fire, because a lot of times that can be very detrimental with things like Xiaolong being able to get additional searches. Bell can also be on Lupus, but you can also just hit like the Lantern. And then Ash on Rosin or Valor Imperm on Rosin. This is the other thing that I was talking about before with like Lucius and Fine Meta. You can Valor Imperm the Rosin. If they have Burger or Caesar, it's going to be unfortunate, but it's still the best hit. So you want to make sure that you do go ahead and stop this. You can always go ahead and Ash like Staker Soul. And then the Ghost Ogre onto the Soul Start so your opponent doesn't get to the additional extenders that they want to get to. Mid-Sky, this one's very specific and you want to make sure that you're on top of this. The pre-preparation of Rights is 3 spells engraved plus full Striker combo and full Mitsu combo. This is the card that you want to stop with 100%. This card does way too much in the deck. Bell or Ash this thing immediately. If you really want to stop a good interruption, you can Bell the Lemnis Gate. This is a huge one. If you want to Ash the 0, that's fine. You can also Valor Imperm the 0 because this is going to get you to engage, which is going to get you to another linkage. So you can linkage into Kagari to add back engage again, right? And then keep going up in card advantage. You can DD Crow the target of Kagari, or if your opponent tributes the Mirakumo to bring it back, you can go ahead and just DD Crow the Mirakumo so you don't have to worry about a board wipe. Now, the last one here is Lunalay. I bring this up a lot because I want to make sure they don't lose to a deck like this. Bell, Ogre onto Wolf or Masquerade so your opponent can't just like banish from grave and then Miracle Fusion. You can DD Crow the Leo Dancer so your opponent doesn't get that as the Miracle Fusion target to summon Liger. And then if your opponent rips Poly and they have Kaleido on board that's already copied a Leo Dancer, you can chain Nib, and then your opponent doesn't have a copy of Leo Dancer to use with the Poly unless they've already used Masquerade and there's a Leo in grave. You also want to go ahead and Valor Imperm onto the Gold Leo, but you want to Ash the Silver Hound. You don't want to just Ash Gold Leo, because if your opponent just goes normal Gold Leo, you Ash it, they go actually foolish, now you've lost. You want to make sure that you're ashing efficiently, you're imperming efficiently. So Valor Imperm onto Gold Leo, and then ash the effect of Silverhound and Grave so you don't get punished by the follow-up play that just does the same thing. If you enjoyed the content, definitely go and check out my Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Instagram. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll check you all in the next video. Thank you.